The steel trap snapped shut around Mufasa's massive paw with a sickening crunch that echoed across the Botswana wilderness, sending Jake Morrison's coffee cup tumbling from his weathered hands as he watched in frozen horror from 50 yards away. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here, not to him. 5 lionesses erupted into defensive positions around their fallen king, their roars splitting the late afternoon silence like thunder as Viktor Petrov's voice crackled through an abandoned radio. "Target acquired! Moving to extraction point!" Sarah's wedding ring caught the dying sunlight as Jake's arthritic fingers trembled against the steering wheel, remembering her final words about finding something beautiful to save. The massive lion's golden eyes met his across the distance, eyes that somehow held recognition, trust, and a desperate plea for help. "Jesus Christ, Mufasa," Jake whispered, his voice breaking as 7 years of buried memories came flooding back. How much time did they have before the poachers returned, and would Jake's promise to his dying wife cost him everything? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Jake Morrison had never imagined his 65th birthday would find him living in a rusted trailer in the heart of Botswana, talking to his dead wife's photograph every morning over instant coffee. The Marine Corps veteran adjusted his worn baseball cap and studied Sarah's smiling face in the cracked frame. The same woman who'd taught second grade for 37 years, who'd made him promise with her dying breath to find something beautiful to save. 3 years had passed since cancer took her, along with their life savings. The $340,000 in medical bills had claimed their Connecticut home, their retirement fund, and nearly his sanity. His military pension of $1,200 monthly barely covered trailer rent back home, but here in Africa, where the American dollar stretched 12 times further, Jake could survive on his ranger salary of $800 and still send money to pay down Sarah's medical debt. "Another day in paradise, sweetheart," he murmured to the photograph, the same ritual that had kept him sane for 3 years. The Botswana Department of Wildlife had hired him despite his age, or perhaps because of it. His marine training and reconnaissance and his gentle way with animals made him perfect for monitoring the vast wilderness preserve that stretched beyond the horizon. Viktor Petrov checked his rifle scope for the 3rd time that morning, his calloused hands steady despite the rage burning in his chest. 7 years since Danny died. 7 years since an 8-year-old boy with blonde hair and a missing front tooth had been torn apart by lions while visiting a Kenyan wildlife sanctuary. 7 years since his wife packed her bags, unable to look at the man who'd promised to protect their only child. The Russian immigrant had built a new life in America after the collapse of the Soviet Union, working construction until he could afford to bring his elderly mother to Boston for her heart condition. Now she needed surgery, $200,000 that insurance wouldn't cover. Professional poaching paid well. A single male lion's head brought $50,000 on the black market, enough to save the only family he had left. "Danny, forgive me," Viktor whispered in accented English, touching the faded photograph in his shirt pocket. His son's bright smile seemed to mock him from beyond the grave. "Mama needs to live. Lions took you from me. Now they pay for her life." The irony wasn't lost on him, using the very animals that destroyed his family to save what remained of it. But grief had long ago calcified into something harder, colder. Viktor Petrov no longer believed in justice or mercy. He believed in results. Neither man knew that their paths would cross that afternoon in the golden grassland of the Kalahari. Neither suspected that a massive lion with distinctive scars and 5 protective lionesses would connect their separate tragedies in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, loss, and redemption. The African sun climbed higher, indifferent to human suffering, as 2 broken souls moved unknowingly toward a collision that would change their lives forever. Jake's morning routine never varied. Coffee at 5:30, Sarah's photograph propped against the sugar bowl, radio check with headquarters at 6 sharp. Today, Static answered his call instead of the familiar voice of dispatcher Margaret Cowley. He tried 3 more times before accepting that his ancient radio had finally given up, like everything else in his life that mattered. "Looks like it's just you and me today, sweetheart," he told Sarah's picture, tracing her smile with his weathered finger. She'd been photographed on their 40th anniversary, her silver hair catching sunlight in their Connecticut backyard, completely unaware that cancer was already growing silently inside her. "Radio's deader than my love life." The morning patrol route took him through 30 square miles of wilderness, checking water holes and monitoring the various prides that called this section of the Kalahari home. Jake had memorized every landmark, every game trail, every termite mound. After 3 years, the animals recognized his battered Land Rover and no longer scattered at his approach. Around noon, something felt wrong. The acacia trees near Elephant Springs showed fresh gouges, too regular, too deliberate to be natural. Jake stopped the vehicle and climbed out, his marine training automatically cataloging details. Boot prints in the red sand, all size 11 or 12, cigarette butts. American brand, disturbed earth where something heavy had been buried and dug up. "Professional grade," he muttered, recognizing the signs from his counterinsurgency training in Southeast Asia. These weren't desperate locals trying to feed their families. This was organized, well-funded, and extremely dangerous. He followed the trail deeper into the bush, finding more evidence at each stop. Snare wire fragments hung from thorn bushes, chemical scent markers designed to attract specific animals. Most disturbing of all, a piece of steel cable with dried blood on the edges. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent when Jake heard the first roar. Deep, resonant, filled with pain and rage, the sound cut through the wilderness silence like a battle cry. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, call for backup, wait for proper support. But his radio was dead, backup was 50 miles away, and something in that roar spoke to the part of him that had never left Vietnam. "Sarah always said I had a hero complex," he told himself, checking his rifle and first aid kit. "Guess some things never change." The roaring grew louder as he approached a cluster of baobab trees near the seasonal riverbed. Jake could hear other sounds now, the agitated calls of lionesses, the metallic scraping of something against stone. He parked the Land Rover behind a termite mound and proceeded on foot, moving with the stealth that had kept him alive in the Mekong Delta 45 years earlier. What he saw through the binoculars made his blood run cold. A massive male lion, easily 400 pounds, was trapped by his left rear paw in a steel leg-hold trap, the kind designed for elephants or rhinos, powerful enough to break bone, cruel enough to ensure a slow death. 5 lionesses paced around him in tight formation, their golden eyes scanning for threats while their leader suffered. But it was the scar on the lion's left front paw that made Jake's hands shake. A perfect number 7 carved into the pad, healed over with white tissue. Jake had put that mark there himself, 7 years and 2,000 miles away, using his marine K-bar knife on a 6-month-old cub whose mother had been killed by poachers. "Mufasa," he whispered, the name coming back like a physical blow. "Jesus Christ, what are the odds?" The memory hit him with startling clarity. Kenya, 2016. A wildlife photography assignment for National Geographic that Sarah had begged him to take after his retirement. The massacre at the Samburu Reserve, 12 lions killed in a single night, including a nursing mother. Jake had found her cub hiding in a drainage culvert, barely alive, too young to survive alone. Sarah had spent 2 weeks nursing the cub back to health in their hotel room, feeding him with a baby bottle, cleaning his wounds, singing the same lullabies she'd once sung to the children in her classroom. When it came time to release him back to the wild, she'd insisted on the marking. so we'll always know if we see him again. "Promise me something, Jake," she'd said that final morning in Kenya, watching the cub disappear into the tall grass. "If we ever cross paths with him again, we'll know he made it. He'll be our sign that some stories have happy endings." Now, 7 years later, that same cub had grown into a magnificent lion, leader of his own pride, trapped and dying while Jake stood helpless 50 yards away. The irony was almost too cruel to contemplate. Sarah's sign of hope had become a symbol of everything Jake couldn't save. The sound of approaching vehicles broke through his reverie. Diesel engines, more than one, coming fast from the north. Viktor Petrov's voice crackled through an abandoned radio near the trap site. "Target acquired. ETA 15 minutes to extraction point." Jake checked his watch, 4:47 p.m. 15 minutes to save a lion he'd helped rescue as a cub, or watch him die at the hands of the very people who'd killed his mother. Time was running out. Jake had faced enemy fire in Vietnam, had held Sarah's hand as cancer slowly stole her away, had buried his life savings along with his wife's dreams. But standing 50 yards from 5 agitated lionesses protecting their wounded king, he felt a fear unlike anything in his 65 years. This wasn't about courage anymore. This was about keeping a promise to a dead woman who still talked to him in his dreams. "Sarah, if you're watching," he whispered, removing his boots and socks in the red sand, "this better be what you meant about finding something beautiful to save." The approach had to be perfect. Jake's marine training kicked in automatically, assessing angles, wind direction, escape routes. The lionesses had formed a defensive perimeter around Mufasa, their golden eyes tracking every movement, muscles coiled for attack. But something in their posture suggested intelligence rather than mere aggression. They were waiting, watching, evaluating his intentions. He moved forward slowly, hands raised, speaking in the same gentle voice Sarah had used with frightened children. "Easy, ladies. Uncle Jake's here. Remember me? I'm the one who helped your boy when he was just a baby." The lead lioness, a magnificent female with a notched ear, took a step toward him. Jake froze, heart hammering against his ribs. This was the moment of truth. Either they remembered some trace of his scent from 7 years ago, or he was about to become another statistic in the Botswana wilderness. The lioness approached within 10 feet, her amber eyes locked on his face. Jake forced himself to remain perfectly still as she circled him, breathing in his scent. Time stretched like a guitar string ready to snap. Then, impossibly, she brushed against his leg with her massive head, the universal feline sign of acceptance. "Good girl," Jake breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now, let's help your friend." The other 4 lionesses parted as he approached Mufasa, creating a narrow corridor to the trapped lion. The big male's eyes met his, and Jake saw recognition there, not just of a scent or a sound, but of something deeper. Trust. The same trust a frightened cub had placed in him 7 years ago. Mufasa's situation was worse than Jake had feared. The steel trap had been designed for rhinoceros, its jaws powerful enough to break bones. The lion's left rear paw was caught just above the toes, and the metal teeth had bitten deep into muscle and tendon. Blood loss was significant, and infection was already setting in around the wound edges. "This is going to hurt, boy," Jake murmured, kneeling beside the trap. "But I promise you'll walk away from this." The mechanism was more complex than the simple snares he'd disarmed in Vietnam. This was military-grade equipment requiring specific pressure points to be released simultaneously. Jake's arthritis-stiffened fingers struggled with the cold steel, and his vision blurred as sweat dripped into his eyes. Mufasa remained eerily calm throughout the process, occasionally lifting his massive head to look at Jake with those intelligent golden eyes. Once, he even made a soft, rumbling sound, not a growl, but something almost conversational, as if encouraging the old man to continue. The Lionesses had arranged themselves in a perfect defensive formation, each covering a different approach vector. Jake realized with amazement that they were protecting him as much as their leader. One of them, a young female with distinctive white markings, had positioned herself where she could watch both Jake's work and the distant tree line. After 20 minutes of careful manipulation, Jake felt the first locking mechanism give way. The trap's jaws loosened slightly, but a secondary spring-loaded device still held Mufasa's paw. This part would require two people working in coordination, one to hold the primary release while the other manipulated the secondary catch. "Damn," Jake muttered, wiping blood from his own hands where the sharp edges had cut him. "I need help, and I need it now." As if summoned by his desperation, the sound of a vehicle engine broke the afternoon silence. Jake's heart sank as he recognized the distinctive rumble of a modified pickup truck, the kind favored by professional poachers for its stealth and cargo capacity. Through the heat shimmer, he could see a figure approaching on foot, carrying what appeared to be a high-powered rifle. The Lionesses immediately sensed the new threat. Their relaxed vigilance transformed into predatory focus, 5 sets of eyes tracking the approaching danger. Mufasa tried to struggle to his feet, his protective instincts overriding his pain, but the trap held him fast. Jake found himself in an impossible position. He couldn't complete the rescue alone, but the approaching stranger was almost certainly here to kill Mufasa, not save him. The radio chatter he'd intercepted earlier suddenly made terrible sense. This was the extraction team, coming to collect their prize. The man emerged from the bush 40 yards away, rifle raised and ready. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years in harsh conditions. His accent carried traces of Eastern Europe when he called out, "Step away from my property, old man." "Property?" Jake didn't look up from his work on the trap. "This lion's got more soul than you'll ever have." "You're American?" The man seemed genuinely surprised. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Keeping a promise," Jake replied, his hands never stopping their careful manipulation of the trap mechanism. "What's your excuse for being here?" $50,000, the man said flatly. "That lion's head is worth $50,000, and my mother needs surgery that costs $200,000. Simple mathematics." Jake finally looked up, studying the gunman's face. Pain lived there, the kind that came from profound loss. This wasn't just a mercenary, this was someone driven by desperation, someone who understood the weight of impossible choices. "Money won't bring back what you really lost," Jake said quietly. "My Sarah always said grief makes men do terrible things. Question is, what kind of man do you want to be when the grief finally passes?" The stranger's rifle wavered slightly. "How do you know about grief?" "Because I've been where you are," Jake answered, returning to his work. "And I know that some choices you can't take back." The standoff stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Victor Petrov kept his rifle trained on the old American, while Jake continued working on the trap, his bloodied hands moving with the precision of a field medic under fire. The 5 lionesses had formed a semicircle around both men, their amber eyes calculating, waiting for the slightest provocation to unleash 400 pounds of fury. "You have exactly 30 seconds to step away," Victor said, his accent thickening with emotion. "Then I start shooting." "Go ahead," Jake replied without looking up. "But you'll have to go through 5 very angry ladies first, and I guarantee they're faster than your reload time." Victor's finger tightened on the trigger, but something in the old man's calm certainty gave him pause. This wasn't bravado. This was the kind of steady confidence that came from facing death before, and finding it less frightening than living with regret. "My name is Victor Petrov, he said, lowering the rifle slightly. 7 years ago, lions killed my 8-year-old son in Kenya, Danny Petrov. Blonde hair, missing his front tooth, loved animals more than anything in this world. Jake's hands froze on the trap mechanism. A chill ran down his spine that had nothing to do with the approaching evening. Danny Petrov, he repeated slowly. July 7th, 2016, Samburu Reserve. How could you possibly know that? Victor's voice cracked with sudden emotion. Jake pointed to the distinctive scar on Mufasa's front paw. Because I carved that 7 the day after your boy died. July 7th, 2016. The day I found this lion as a 6-month-old cub hiding in a drainage ditch after poachers killed his mother. The rifle slipped from Victor's numb fingers. You're lying. Danny threw himself between a poacher's rifle and this cub, Jake continued, his voice gentle but unwavering. His last words were, "Don't let them hurt the baby." The whole thing was caught on the sanctuary's security cameras. I saw the footage, Victor. Your son died protecting this lion. Victor staggered backward as if struck. 7 years of carefully constructed rage crumbled in an instant, replaced by a grief so raw it doubled him over. No, that can't be right. The report said, they said he was mauled by lions. The reports were wrong, Jake said firmly. Or maybe someone wanted to cover up the fact that an 8-year-old boy showed more courage than the entire security staff. Danny died a hero, protecting what he loved. Mufasa, despite his pain and the steel trap crushing his paw, lifted his massive head to look directly at Victor. The lion's golden eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost human. And for one impossible moment, Victor could have sworn he saw recognition there. He remembers, Jake whispered, watching the interaction. Lions don't forget, Victor. They remember kindness, and they remember sacrifice. This lion has been carrying your son's memory for 7 years. Victor collapsed to his knees in the red sand, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his mistake. Everything he'd done since Danny's death, the rage, the revenge, the transformation into the very thing his son would have despised, it had all been built on a lie. I've become a monster, he sobbed. Danny would hate what I've become. Danny would understand, Jake said quietly, finally succeeding in releasing the first locking mechanism. The trap's jaws loosened slightly, and Mufasa's breathing became less labored. Grief makes us do things we never thought possible. The question is, what we do when we realize we've lost our way. The sound of approaching vehicles broke the moment of revelation. Victor's team of 4 professional poachers emerged from the bush, heavily armed and clearly impatient. Their leader, a scarred man with dead eyes, surveyed the scene with disgust. "What the hell is taking so long, Victor?" the team leader demanded. "We've got buyers waiting, and this operation should have been finished an hour ago." "Stand down, Marcus," Victor said, struggling to his feet. "We're not taking this lion." Marcus laughed harshly. "Like hell we're not. That cat's worth more than your mother's surgery, and we didn't come this far to go home empty-handed." "I said stand down." Victor's voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to command. "This operation is over." "You've gone soft," Marcus snarled, raising his automatic weapon. "Maybe losing your kid scrambled your brains, but the rest of us need the money." The mutiny Jake had sensed brewing finally erupted. Marcus turned his rifle on Victor, while the other 3 poachers spread out to surround Jake and the lions. The lionesses immediately responded to the new threat, their low growls building to a crescendo that raised the hair on Jake's arms. "Last chance, old man," Marcus called out. "Step away from the cat, or we put you down with it." Jake looked up from the trap, his Marine training automatically assessing the tactical situation. 4 armed men with automatic weapons positioned at compass points around his location. The lionesses were brave, but they couldn't stop bullets. Mufasa was still trapped, unable to defend himself or retreat. It was a textbook kill zone with no apparent escape. "Victor," Jake said calmly, "I'm going to need your help with this trap. It requires 2 people to operate the secondary release." "Are you insane?" Victor stared at him in disbelief. "They'll kill us both." "Maybe," Jake agreed, "but your son died protecting this lion. Question is, are you going to honor that sacrifice or let these bastards finish what the original poachers started?" Victor looked down at Mufasa, seeing not a prize to be claimed, but a living reminder of his son's courage. The lion's eyes met his again, and this time Victor was certain he saw something beyond animal intelligence. A spark of recognition, a connection that transcended species. "Danny always said animals could tell if you were a good person or a bad person," Victor murmured, kneeling beside Jake at the trap. "He'd want me to be a good person." Marcus opened fire, his bullets kicking up sand inches from their position. The lionesses exploded into action, scattering to different positions while maintaining their protective formation around the 2 men and their trapped leader. Jake and Victor pressed themselves flat against the ground, working frantically on the trap mechanism while gunfire erupted around them. "The secondary catch is on your side," Jake shouted over the noise. "When I count to 3, push down on the lever while I release the primary spring." "I can't see it," Victor yelled back, his hands searching desperately along the trap's mechanism. "Feel for a small metal tab about 6 inches from the main hinge," Jake instructed, his own fingers working by touch as much as sight. "It'll be smooth compared to the rough casting." A lioness screamed in pain as a bullet grazed her flank, but she didn't retreat. Instead, she used the wound to fuel her rage, launching herself at the nearest poacher with a roar that seemed to shake the earth itself. The man's terrified screams were cut short with sickening finality. "Found it!" Victor called out, his fingers closing around the release mechanism. "On 3, Jake counted. 1, 2, 3. Both men pressed their respective releases simultaneously, and the trap finally gave way with a metallic shriek. Mufasa's paw came free in a gush of blood and trapped fluids, but the great lion was alive and mobile. Despite his injuries, Mufasa rose to his feet with the dignity befitting the king of beasts. He looked once at each of the men who had freed him, then turned his attention to the remaining poachers who dared threaten his pride. The battle that followed was brief but decisive. 3 lionesses flanked the poachers while Mufasa, limping but determined, approached from the front. Marcus and his surviving men found themselves facing not just animals, but a coordinated hunting unit that had perfected the art of killing over millions of years of evolution. The gunfire ceased as abruptly as it had begun. When the dust settled, Marcus lay motionless 20 yards away, his rifle bent and useless. The other 2 poachers had vanished into the bush, their courage failing them when faced with the reality of their chosen profession. Victor stared at the carnage, his face pale with shock. "Is this what Danny saw that day? This violence?" "No," Jake said firmly, applying a field dressing to Mufasa's wounded paw. "Danny saw protection. He saw family taking care of family. That's what lions do, Victor. They protect what they love." As if to prove his point, the 5 lionesses converged on their wounded leader, gently nuzzling his neck and flanks in a display of affection that was unmistakably familial. Mufasa responded with soft rumbles of reassurance, telling his pride that he was wounded but alive. "They really are a family," Victor whispered in wonder. "Just like people," Jake agreed. "They love, they grieve, they protect each other. Your son understood that. That's why he couldn't stand by and watch this cub die." Victor approached Mufasa slowly, his hands empty and open. The great lion watched him carefully, then did something that defied everything Victor thought he knew about wild animals. He extended his massive head and gently touched Victor's outstretched palm with his nose. "He forgives me," Victor breathed, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Danny forgives me." The sun was setting over the Kalahari, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that matched the lions' magnificent coats. Jake watched Victor's transformation with the satisfaction of a promise kept, feeling Sarah's presence as surely as if she were standing beside him. "We did it, sweetheart," he whispered to the desert wind. "We saved something beautiful." The Botswana Wildlife Department helicopter appeared on the horizon just as Jake finished bandaging Mufasa's wounded paw with strips torn from his own shirt. The rhythmic thump of rotor blades sent the lionesses into defensive positions, but Mufasa remained calm, his golden eyes never leaving Jake's face as the old Marine worked with the gentle precision of a field medic. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, securing the makeshift bandage. "Cavalry's coming, but they're the good guys." Victor sat in stunned silence 20 feet away, staring at Marcus's lifeless body while his entire worldview crumbled and rebuilt itself around the truth about his son. 7 years of rage had evaporated in the span of an hour, leaving behind only the raw grief he'd been running from since Danny's death. The helicopter touched down in a whirlwind of sand and dry grass, disgorging 4 armed rangers and a veterinarian carrying a medical kit. Captain Joseph Mogwai, a 30-year veteran of wildlife enforcement, surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every possible permutation of human stupidity in the African bush. "Jake Morrison!" Captain Mogwai called out, his voice carrying the authority of command. "What in God's name happened here?" "Poaching operation," Jake replied, helping Mufasa to his feet. The lion tested his injured paw gingerly, but could bear weight on it. "This gentleman helped me disrupt it." He nodded toward Victor, who looked like a man emerging from a long nightmare. Captain Mogwai's gaze shifted to the automatic weapons scattered around the clearing, then to Marcus's body. "And the casualties?" "Self-defense," Victor said quietly, standing up with his hands visible. "My former associates didn't appreciate my change of heart about lion hunting." The vet, a young woman named Dr. Sarah Molefe, approached Mufasa with professional caution. The lionesses tensed, but the big male's calm demeanor seemed to communicate that these new humans posed no threat. Dr. Molefe knelt beside him, examining Jake's field dressing with obvious approval. "This is excellent work," she told Jake. "Did you have medical training?" "Marine Corps," Jake replied. "Long time ago. How bad is the damage?" Dr. Molefe carefully unwrapped the makeshift bandage, revealing the deep puncture wounds where the trap's teeth had bitten into Mufasa's paw. The lion remained perfectly still during the examination, occasionally glancing at Jake as if seeking reassurance. "He'll live," Dr. Molefe announced after several tense minutes. "No broken bones, though there's significant soft tissue damage. He'll be limping for a few weeks, but lions are remarkably resilient." She began cleaning the wounds with antiseptic while preparing a proper pressure bandage. "This is unusual behavior for a wild lion, though. He's acting almost domesticated." "He's not domesticated," Jake said carefully. "He just has a long memory." Captain Mogwai had been examining the sophisticated trap mechanism with growing concern. "This is military-grade equipment," he announced. "Part of an organized operation, not some local poacher trying to feed his family." He turned to Victor. "You want to explain how you got involved with people like this?" Victor looked at Danny's photograph in his wallet, then at Mufasa, who was patiently enduring Dr. Molefe's ministrations. "My son was killed by lions 7 years ago," he said slowly. "Or so I thought. I've spent the last 2 years hunting them for revenge and money. Today I learned I was wrong about everything." "Wrong how?" Captain Mowgli pressed. Jake intervened before Victor could answer. The lion that killed his son wasn't a lion at all. It was grief playing tricks on a father's memory. The real story is that his boy died protecting this lion when he was just a cub. Captain Mowgli studied both men carefully, his experienced eye reading the truth in their faces. "And you can prove this?" "I have photographs," Jake said, "and video evidence from the Samburu Reserve in Kenya. Danny Petrov died a hero, Captain. This man's been punishing himself for his son's courage." Dr. Molefe finished bandaging Mufasa's paw and stepped back to observe her patient. The lion rose carefully, testing his weight distribution, then did something that made everyone present catch their breath. He approached Victor and rested his massive head against the man's chest. "In 30 years of wildlife work," Captain Mowgli said quietly, "I have never seen anything like that." Victor's hands trembled as he gently stroked Mufasa's mane. "He remembers Danny," he whispered. "This lion remembers my son." The 5 lionesses had been watching the proceedings with typical feline patience, but now they began to exhibit behavior that defied conventional understanding of wild animal psychology. One by one, they approached Victor, each touching his outstretched hand with her nose before returning to their positions around Mufasa. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Molefe breathed, pulling out her phone to record the interaction. "Lions don't behave this way with strangers. There's obviously a history here." Jake found himself thinking of Sarah, remembering her insistence that some bonds transcended the boundaries between species. She'd always believed that love left marks on the world, invisible but permanent, waiting to be recognized by those with eyes to see. "Captain," Jake said, "we need to discuss Victor's situation. He's willing to provide intelligence on the international poaching ring he was working for. Names, locations, methods, buyers, everything." Victor nodded emphatically. "I have records, contacts, financial information. I want to help shut them down." "In exchange for immunity?" Captain Mowgli asked. "In exchange for the chance to honor my son's memory properly," Victor corrected. "I don't care what happens to me. I just want to make sure Danny's sacrifice meant something." Captain Mowgli considered this while watching the lion's continued acceptance of Victor's presence. "The Botswana government has been trying to infiltrate this particular network for 3 years. If you're willing to cooperate fully, we might be able to work something out." "What about his mother's surgery?" Jake asked, remembering Victor's original motivation. "She still needs medical care." "Actually," Dr. Molefe interjected, "there's a program through the International Wildlife Foundation that provides medical assistance to families of people who help with conservation efforts. If Mr. Petrov is serious about changing sides, we might be able to arrange funding for his mother's treatment." Victor stared at her in disbelief. "You would do that? After everything I've done?" "People change," Captain Mowgli said simply. "The question is whether the change is genuine. These lions seem to think it is, and lions are excellent judges of character." As if to emphasize the point, Mufasa limped over to Jake and performed the same head-touching ritual he'd shared with Victor. The gesture was clearly one of gratitude and recognition, a bond forged 7 years ago and renewed in the crucible of the afternoon's events. "There's something else," Jake said, an idea forming in his mind. "Victor has intimate knowledge of poaching operations, and I have 30 years of military training plus 3 years of field experience in this region. What if we combined our skills for conservation instead of destruction?" "You're suggesting a partnership?" Captain Mowgli asked. "I'm suggesting we turn poachers into protectors," Jake replied. "Victor knows how they think, how they operate, where they strike. With that knowledge, we could stay ahead of them, maybe even convert some of the foot soldiers the way we converted him." Victor looked up from where he knelt beside Mufasa, his eyes bright with something that might have been hope. You would trust me with that responsibility? After what I've done? Trust is earned, Jake said. But redemption has to start somewhere. Your son believed in protecting what he loved. Maybe it's time you started believing in the same thing. The sun had almost completely set, painting the Kalahari in shades of deep gold and purple. The lionesses had relaxed their vigilant postures, and Mufasa was now lying comfortably in the sand, his injured paw elevated, but his bearing still regal. Dr. Molefe finished packing her medical kit and turned to address both men. This lion will need follow-up care. Daily wound cleaning, antibiotic injections, monitoring for infection. It's going to require someone who can get close enough to provide medical attention. I'll do it, Victor said immediately. I owe him that much. We'll both do it, Jake corrected. Partners, remember? Captain Mogwai pulled out his radio and began making arrangements for the cleanup operation. Marcus's body would need to be removed, the sophisticated trap equipment collected as evidence, and formal statements taken from all witnesses. But first, he had one more question for the two men who had somehow forged an alliance in the midst of a gun battle. What made you trust each other? He asked. An hour ago, you were enemies. Now you're talking about working together. Jake and Victor exchanged glances, both thinking of an 8-year-old boy whose courage had reached across 7 years to heal wounds that seemed permanent. Sometimes, Jake said finally, the dead teach us how to live. Mufasa's deep rumble of agreement seemed to echo across the darkening wilderness, carrying with it the promise of new beginnings built on the foundation of old love. 3 weeks later, Jake received the phone call that shattered his fragile hope like glass against concrete. Dr. Patricia Wells from Boston General Hospital spoke in the careful, measured tones that medical professionals used when delivering devastating news to families who'd already endured too much. Mr. Morrison, I'm calling about Viktor Petrov's mother, Elena. I'm afraid the surgical complications we discussed have become more serious than we initially anticipated. Jake gripped the satellite phone with white knuckles, standing outside his trailer in the pre-dawn darkness of the Kalahari. 40 yards away, Mufasa lay resting under his favorite acacia tree, his injured paw nearly healed but still tender. The lion had taken to sleeping within sight of Jake's trailer, a behavior that both amazed and comforted the old Marine. What kind of complications? Jake asked, though he dreaded the answer. Elena's heart is failing faster than we expected. The damage from years of untreated valve disease is extensive. We need to move up the surgery timeline significantly, or... Dr. Wells paused, choosing her words carefully. Mr. Morrison, without immediate intervention, Elena has perhaps 2 weeks to live. Jake felt the familiar weight of helplessness settling on his shoulders like an old, unwelcome friend. It was the same feeling he'd experienced watching Sarah waste away in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines that prolonged suffering without offering genuine hope. The International Wildlife Foundation funding, is it still available? That's part of the problem, Dr. Wells continued. The paperwork is tangled in bureaucracy. It could take months to process, and frankly, we don't have months. The surgery needs to happen within the next 72 hours, or it won't matter how much funding eventually comes through. Jake closed his eyes, thinking of Victor's transformation over the past 3 weeks. The man had thrown himself into conservation work with the fervor of someone seeking absolution. He'd provided intelligence that led to the arrests of 12 major poachers across southern Africa. He'd personally dismantled trap lines that would have killed dozens of animals. Most importantly, he'd found peace in the daily routine of caring for Mufasa's recovery. How much? Jake asked quietly. The full surgical package, including post-operative care and medications, runs about $220,000. I know that's a substantial amount. I'll transfer the money today, Jake interrupted. Dr. Wells was silent for several heartbeats. Mr. Morrison, are you certain? That's a life-changing sum of money. Jake looked at Sarah's photograph propped in his trailer window, remembering her final words about finding something beautiful to save. "Doctor, I've already buried one person I couldn't afford to save. I won't do it again." After ending the call, Jake sat on his trailer steps and did the mathematics of his remaining life. His military pension, combined with the small life insurance payout from Sarah's death, totaled exactly $247,000, enough to cover Elena's surgery with a few $1,000s left over. It would mean giving up any hope of returning to America, accepting that he would live and die in this African wilderness. But it would also mean that Victor could continue his work without the crushing weight of another death on his conscience. Victor arrived for their morning patrol an hour later, carrying coffee and the infectious optimism that had replaced his former rage. Over the past 3 weeks, Jake had watched grief transform into purpose in the younger man's eyes. Victor had found his path to redemption through daily acts of conservation, and Jake couldn't bear to watch that progress derailed by financial tragedy. "The wire transfer should complete by noon," Jake announced without preamble as Victor approached the Land Rover. "Wire transfer?" Victor looked confused. "What wire transfer?" "Your mother's surgery. Dr. Wells called this morning. They need to operate within 72 hours, or Elena won't survive." Victor's coffee cup slipped from his numb fingers, shattering against the red sand. "But the foundation funding, they said it would come through." "Bureaucracy moves slower than medical emergencies," Jake said gently. "I've wired the money to Boston General. Elena will have her surgery tomorrow." "Jake, no!" Victor's voice cracked with emotion. "I can't let you do that. It's your entire life savings." "It's money," Jake corrected. "Elena is family. You don't abandon family over money." Victor stared at him in shock, struggling to process the magnitude of the gesture. "But what will you do? How will you live?" Jake gestured toward the vast wilderness stretching to the horizon, where Mufasa was beginning his morning patrol with his 5 devoted lionesses. "This is home now. The department pays me enough to survive, and honestly, I can't imagine being anywhere else." "I'll pay you back," Victor said desperately. "Every penny, I swear it. I'll work double shifts, take on extra assignments. The only payment I want is for you to keep being the man your son would be proud of," Jake interrupted. "Danny died protecting something he loved. You're living to protect what he loved. That's payment enough." Victor broke down completely. 8 months of suppressed grief finally finding release in the vast silence of the African morning. Jake let him cry, understanding that some wounds needed to drain completely before they could begin to heal. Mufasa, sensing the emotional disturbance, limped over from his resting spot beneath the acacia tree. The great lion approached Victor with the same gentle intelligence he'd shown during his rescue, resting his massive head against the sobbing man's shoulder. "He knows," Victor whispered through his tears. "He knows I'm crying about Danny." "Lions understand loss better than most people," Jake observed. "They mourn their dead, protect their family, and they know the difference between tears of grief and tears of gratitude." The satellite phone rang again, interrupting the moment. This time it was Captain Mogwai, with news that would complicate their already emotional morning. "Jake, we've got a problem." The captain's voice crackled through the static. "Intelligence suggests a major poaching operation targeting your sector. Professional team, military-grade equipment, estimated arrival sometime in the next 48 hours. Jake felt his blood chill. "How big a team?" 12 to 15 operatives based on radio intercepts. "They're calling it Operation Golden Mane. Sounds like they're specifically targeting male lions with the goal of wiping out breeding populations." Victor had overheard enough of the conversation to understand the implications. He wiped his eyes and stood up straighter, his grief transforming into determination. "They're coming for Mufasa and the other Pride leaders." "That's our assessment," Captain Mogwai confirmed. We're organizing a response, but our closest backup is 6 hours away. You two are going to be our early warning system. Jake studied Victor's face, seeing echoes of the man who'd once led his own poaching teams with ruthless efficiency. You know how they'll approach this, he said. What would you do if you were still running with them? Victor's expression grew hard as he mentally shifted back into his former role. Night approach, multiple entry points, coordinated strikes designed to maximize kills before any response team could arrive. They'll use radio jammers to prevent calls for help, and they'll have heavy weapons in case they encounter resistance. Can we stop them? Not directly, Victor admitted. 12 professionals with military equipment against 2 old men. That's suicide. He paused, studying the landscape with tactical eyes. But we might be able to disrupt their operation enough to save some of the animals. Mufasa seemed to sense the growing tension. The lion's ears were pricked forward, and he was scanning the horizon with the alertness of a predator detecting distant threats. His lionesses had also emerged from their resting spots, forming their characteristic protective formation. The lions know something's wrong, Jake observed. Animals sense danger long before humans do, Victor agreed. Question is, do we evacuate the prides to safer territory, or do we prepare to defend this ground? Jake thought of Sarah's words about finding something beautiful to save, then looked at Mufasa's intelligent golden eyes. This lion had survived one rescue already. He deserved better than to die running from the same kind of men who'd killed his mother 7 years ago. We make our stand here, Jake decided. This is their territory, and we're not giving it up without a fight. Victor nodded grimly. Then we'd better start preparing, because when they come, they'll come hard and fast, and they won't leave any witnesses. The morning sun climbed higher over the Kalahari, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were all racing toward a darkness deeper than any African night. The attack came at 3:17 a.m., 43 minutes earlier than Victor had predicted. Jake jolted awake in his trailer to the sound of suppressed gunfire and Mufasa's roar of pain echoing across the darkness. Through his window, muzzle flashes strobed like deadly lightning against the star-filled African sky. They're using night vision, Victor's voice crackled through the radio as Jake grabbed his rifle and emergency kit. Professional setup, just like I told you. They've got Mufasa pinned down near the water hole. Jake's blood turned to ice water as he processed the tactical situation. 12 professional killers with military equipment against 2 aging men and a pride of lions. The mathematics of survival were brutally simple. They were all going to die unless something changed dramatically in the next few minutes. "Where are you?" Jake whispered into the radio, slipping out of his trailer and moving toward the sounds of battle. "Flanking position, 200 meters southeast of your location," Victor replied. "Jake, it's worse than we thought. They're not just hunting for trophies, they're systematically executing every animal they find. This is a massacre." Through his binoculars, Jake could see the horror unfolding near the water hole. 3 lionesses lay motionless in the sand, their bodies grotesquely illuminated by the poachers' tactical lights. Mufasa crouched behind a fallen log, blood streaming from what appeared to be a shoulder wound, while his remaining pride mates circled desperately, trying to protect their wounded king. The poaching team had spread out in a textbook assault formation, using coordinated fields of fire to control the killing ground. Their leader, a massive man with a shaved head and military bearing, directed the slaughter with the cold efficiency of someone who viewed wildlife as nothing more than walking dollar signs. "Marksman in the baobab tree, 11 o'clock. Victor's voice guided Jake's attention to a sniper positioned 40 feet above the battlefield. "He's got clear lines of sight on everything. Take him out and we might have a chance." Jake studied the tree through his scope, calculating wind speed and bullet drop over the 300-meter distance. His hands trembled slightly. Whether from age, adrenaline, or the weight of what he was about to do, he couldn't tell. Killing other human beings had never gotten easier, even when they richly deserved it. "Sarah, forgive me," he whispered, then squeezed the trigger. The sniper's body tumbled from the tree with a sickening crash, and suddenly the poacher's tactical advantage evaporated. Without their elevated overwatch, they could no longer coordinate their assault with the same deadly precision. "Nice shot, Marine." Victor's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. "Now we've got their attention." The poaching team immediately shifted their focus from the lions to the new threats. Spraying automatic weapons fire in Jake's general direction, bullets whined off rocks and thudded into tree trunks, forcing Jake to scramble for better cover behind a granite outcropping. But the diversion had given Mufasa and his surviving pride mates the opening they needed. The great lion rose from behind his cover, ignoring his shoulder wound, and charged directly at the nearest poacher with a roar that seemed to shake the earth itself. What followed was a nightmare of claws, fangs, and screaming that would haunt Jake's dreams for the rest of his life. The remaining lionesses attacked with coordinated fury, their grief for their dead sisters transforming into deadly rage. Automatic weapons chattered uselessly as the cats closed to point-blank range, where superior firepower meant nothing against 400 pounds of muscle and fury. "The leader's making a run for it," Victor shouted over the chaos. "He's heading for the extraction vehicle." Jake could see the bald man sprinting toward a modified pickup truck parked beyond the tree line, carrying what appeared to be a heavy rifle case. If he escaped with evidence of the night's massacre, other teams would follow. This cycle of violence would continue until every lion in the preserve was dead. "Not today," Jake muttered, rising from cover despite the ongoing gunfire. His 70-year-old knees protested as he broke into an awkward run, but Marine Corps training kicked in automatically. He'd been in firefights before, had chased enemies through jungles and across beaches. This was just another mission, albeit one with higher personal stakes. The poaching team leader reached his vehicle and was fumbling with the ignition when Jake tackled him from behind. Both men crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs and curses, fighting for control of the rifle that had skittered away during the impact. "You crazy old bastard," the poacher snarled in accented English, driving his elbow into Jake's ribs. "You're going to die for a bunch of animals?" "Better than living as a coward," Jake gasped back, using a wrestling hold he'd learned in boot camp 50 years earlier. The fight was brutally uneven. Jake's opponent was 20 years younger, 50 pounds heavier, and professionally trained in close-quarters combat. But Jake had something the younger man lacked: the desperate fury of someone protecting his chosen family. They rolled across the rocky ground, trading punches and attempting to gain leverage for a killing blow. Jake's arthritis screamed in protest, and he could feel his strength ebbing with each passing second. This was a young man's game, and he was no longer young. Then Mufasa appeared. The wounded lion materialized out of the darkness like an avenging spirit, his golden eyes blazing with protective rage. The poacher froze in terror as 420 pounds of apex predator loomed over the struggling men, blood from the lion's shoulder wound dripping onto his face. "Jesus Christ," the poacher whispered, his voice breaking with fear. "Call him off! Call him off!" "He's not my pet," Jake replied, rolling away to give Mufasa room to work. "He's my friend, and friends protect each other." Mufasa studied the poacher with the same calculating intelligence Jake had seen during their first encounter. The lion seemed to understand exactly who was responsible for the night's carnage, who had ordered the deaths of his pride mates, who represented everything evil about humanity's relationship with the natural world. The poacher's scream cut through the African night like a blade, then abruptly stopped. Victor appeared at Jake's side, helping the older man to his feet while surveying the aftermath of the battle. Bodies littered the ground around the waterhole, some human, some feline, all testament to the savage reality of competing claims on this ancient landscape. "How many did we lose?" Jake asked, though he dreaded the answer. "3 lionesses," Victor replied quietly. "Plus, Mufasa's shoulder wound needs immediate attention, but the pride survived, Jake. The core of the family is intact." Jake looked around at the carnage, feeling suddenly exhausted by the weight of violence and loss. This wasn't how conservation was supposed to work. Protecting wildlife shouldn't require becoming killers themselves, shouldn't demand that old men fight wars against younger, better-equipped enemies. "Is this what Sarah meant?" he asked the star-filled sky. "Is this what you wanted me to find?" As if in answer to his question, the surviving lionesses approached from the darkness, carrying something in their mouths. Jake's breath caught as he realized what they were bringing: cubs, tiny golden bundles of life that had been hidden away during the battle. "New life," Victor breathed, watching the lionesses gently place their babies near Mufasa's feet. They were protecting the next generation. Mufasa limped over to Jake and performed his familiar head-touching ritual, but this time something was different. The lion's golden eyes held a depth of communication that transcended species barriers, a message of gratitude and understanding that needed no translation. "You're welcome, old friend," Jake whispered, gently stroking the lion's bloodied mane. Sarah would have loved this moment. Dawn was breaking over the Kalahari, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that matched the lion's magnificent coats. Captain Magwa's helicopter appeared on the horizon, bringing medical supplies and cleanup crews for the night's grim work. But in the growing light, watching Mufasa nuzzle his new cubs while Victor tended to the wounded lionesses, Jake finally understood what Sarah had meant about finding something beautiful to save. It wasn't about the individual animals or the specific battles won and lost. It was about the family that emerged from shared struggle, the bonds forged in the crucible of protecting what mattered most. It was about love proving stronger than death, hope surviving in the face of overwhelming darkness. The cubs would grow up in a world where their father and his human allies had stood together against those who would destroy everything beautiful for profit. That knowledge would shape them, strengthen them, prepare them to face whatever challenges awaited in their future. This was Sarah's gift to him, not just the promise of something beautiful to save, but the understanding that saving others ultimately saved yourself. 6 months after the night that changed everything, Jake Morrison stood at the edge of the Kalahari, watching the most extraordinary sight of his 70 years on Earth. Mufasa's pride had not only survived the massacre, they had thrived beyond anything wildlife biologists thought possible. The lion's shoulder had healed completely, leaving only a thin scar as a reminder of that terrible night. But more importantly, all 5 surviving lionesses had given birth to healthy cubs within weeks of each other. 12 golden bundles of energy now tumbled through the grass around their parents, playing games that would one day become deadly serious hunting skills. "It's unprecedented," Dr. Sarah Moleff said, adjusting her camera equipment to document the unusual behavior. Lions typically space their births over longer periods. This synchronized reproduction suggests an adaptive response to population pressure. They're literally rebuilding their numbers as quickly as biologically possible. Viktor Petrov knelt nearby, bottle-feeding the smallest cub, a tiny female they'd named Hope, who had been rejected by her exhausted mother. His transformation from professional killer to devoted caregiver continued to amaze everyone who witnessed it, but none more so than Victor himself. "Danny would have loved this," he murmured, as Hope's tiny claws kneaded his shirt while she nursed. He always said baby animals were the best thing about nature documentaries. The call from Boston General had come 3 weeks after the attack. Elena Petrov's surgery had been a complete success, and she was recovering faster than doctors had dared hope. But the real miracle was what she told Victor during their first post-operative phone conversation. "I'm proud of you, my son," she had said in heavily accented English. "Danny's spirit is at peace now, knowing you're protecting what he loved." Jake had listened to that conversation from across the trailer, watching Victor's face transform as 40 years of guilt finally began to lift. Elena had decided to sell her Boston apartment and move to Botswana, using the proceeds to help fund the conservation foundation that now bore her grandson's name. The Danny Petrov Wildlife Foundation had raised $2.8 million in its first year, employing former poachers as rangers and game wardens across southern Africa. Their success rate in preventing wildlife crimes had improved dramatically, partly because they understood the mindset and methods of those they pursued. "We fight fire with fire," Victor explained to visiting journalists who came to document their unconventional approach. Who better to catch a poacher than someone who used to be one? Jake's role in the foundation was officially listed as Field Operations Director, but his real function was harder to define. He was part mentor, part confessor, part father figure to the growing collection of reformed criminals who found their way to redemption through wildlife protection. "Mr. Jake," called out Thomas Sibiago, a former ivory trader who now ran anti-poaching patrols, "Mufasa's doing that thing again." Jake looked up from the Foundation's monthly reports to see the magnificent lion approaching their camp with his characteristic limping gait. But Mufasa wasn't alone. Behind him walked a procession that defied everything Jake thought he knew about animal behavior. 5 adult lionesses, 12 cubs, and 3 subadult males moved in perfect formation like a royal entourage paying homage to visiting dignitaries. At Mufasa's silent command, they arranged themselves in a semicircle around the human camp, close enough to touch but maintaining respectful distance. "He's introducing the new generation," Victor said softly, setting down hope and rising to his feet. "Look at how the cubs are watching us. No fear, just curiosity." One of the bolder cubs, a male with Mufasa's distinctive golden coloring, broke from the group and approached Jake directly. The tiny lion sniffed his boots, then sat down and stared up at him with the same intelligent golden eyes that had marked his father. "Hello there, little prince," Jake whispered, extending his hand for the cub to investigate. "Your daddy and I go way back." The cub responded by rubbing against Jake's leg with the same head-bonding behavior Mufasa had shown that first day. Dr. Molefe began frantically documenting the interaction, knowing she was witnessing something that would revolutionize understanding of human-wildlife relationships. "This is learned behavior," she explained excitedly to her recording equipment. "These cubs are being taught that specific humans are safe, trustworthy, part of their extended family structure. It's cultural transmission of knowledge across species barriers." Elena Petrov arrived that afternoon on the weekly supply helicopter, her first visit to see the Foundation's work firsthand. At 78, she moved carefully, but with determination, her eyes bright with the curiosity that had carried her through 8 decades of life's challenges. Mufasa's reaction to her presence provided the day's most emotional moment. The lion approached slowly, studying her face with obvious recognition. Elena stood perfectly still as he sniffed her hands, her clothes, searching for familiar scents. "He smells Danny," she whispered, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "He remembers my grandson's scent on my clothes." Victor translated his mother's Polish words for the others. "She says Danny used to hug her every morning before school. The scent stays in fabric for years." Mufasa's response was unmistakable. He rested his massive head against Elena's chest in the same gesture of affection he'd shown Jake and Victor. The old woman's hands trembled as she stroked his mane, completing a circle of connection that had begun with an 8-year-old boy's courage 7 years earlier. "Danny, you beautiful boy," she whispered in English, looking directly into Mufasa's eyes. "You saved more than a lion that day. You saved us all." The Foundation's impact extended far beyond their immediate conservation work. Jake's daily emails to wildlife organizations around the world had sparked a movement among veteran communities, with former military personnel volunteering for anti-poaching operations across Africa and Asia. "Warriors protecting warriors," Jake explained to a CNN crew documenting their work. "These animals face the same kind of organized, professional enemies that soldiers fight against. Who better to understand that kind of warfare?" The most unexpected development came when Sarah's former students began reaching out through social media. Word had spread about Jake's work, and the children she'd taught decades earlier, now adults with families of their own, wanted to contribute to the foundation in her memory. "Mrs. Morrison always said animals were just people who couldn't talk," wrote Jennifer Walsh, who'd been in Sarah's second-grade class 30 years earlier. She would have loved knowing her husband was giving them a voice. The tribute letters arrived daily, each one adding another layer to Jake's understanding of Sarah's legacy. She'd touched thousands of young lives during her teaching career, and now those children, grown into doctors, lawyers, teachers, and parents, were honoring her memory by supporting wildlife conservation. By Christmas, the Foundation had enough funding to expand operations into 3 additional countries. More importantly, they'd established a network of reformed poachers who provided intelligence on upcoming operations, often preventing massacres before they could begin. "We've intercepted communications about 12 major operations this year," Captain Mogwai reported during their monthly planning meeting. "Estimated lives saved: over 400 large mammals, including 47 breeding-age lions." Victor had framed the statistics sheet and hung it in his trailer next to Danny's photograph. "Every number represents a family that gets to stay together," he told visitors. "Every life saved honors my son's sacrifice." The evening before Elena's departure, the entire pride gathered around the human camp in what Dr. Molefe could only describe as a farewell ceremony. The cubs played at Elena's feet while their parents maintained protective watch, and Mufasa positioned himself between the old woman and the darkening wilderness. "They're saying goodbye," Victor realized, watching the lion's behavior. "They understand she's leaving." Elena reached into her purse and withdrew something that made Jake's breath catch. Danny's favorite stuffed lion, worn soft from years of bedtime snuggling. She held it out toward Mufasa, speaking in the mixture of Polish and English that had become her trademark. "For you to remember him by," she said simply. Mufasa sniffed the toy carefully, then did something that brought tears to every human eye present. He gently took it in his massive jaws and carried it to where the cubs were playing, setting it down among their other toys. "He's adding Danny to the pride," Jake whispered, understanding the profound symbolism of the gesture. "My grandson is now part of their family story." As the helicopter lifted off the next morning, Elena pressed her face to the window for one last look at the pride that had given her family its healing. Mufasa stood on a rocky outcrop with his cubs gathered around him, the morning sun turning their coats to living gold. Jake found Sarah's photograph that evening and propped it against the acacia tree where Mufasa often rested. "We did it, sweetheart," he told her smiling image. "We found something beautiful to save, and it saved us right back." The lion approached at his usual evening time, settling down beside the photograph with his characteristic dignity. For a moment, Jake could almost see Sarah sitting there too, the teacher who'd believed in second chances, the woman who'd insisted that love never truly died but transformed into something larger than itself. 12 cubs tumbled around their parents in the gathering dusk, their playful energy a promise that the future would be different from the past. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats to face and overcome. But tonight, under the vast African sky, a pride of lions and a handful of humans shared the peace that comes from protecting what matters most. In the distance, Victor's voice carried across the camp as he radioed the day's report to headquarters. All quiet on the Western Front. The family is safe, and the future looks bright. Jake smiled, knowing that Sarah would have loved that phrase. The promise of safety, the gift of tomorrow, the radical hope that broken things could be made whole again through love and stubborn determination. The stars emerged one by one over the Kalahari, witnesses to the miracle of redemption played out in the space between two species who had learned to see each other as family. Jake Morrison thought his story ended when cancer took Sarah and the medical bills took everything else. At 65, living alone in a trailer in Botswana, he felt like another forgotten American senior, too old to matter, too tired to dream. But sometimes life's greatest chapters begin when we think the book is closed. When Jake rescued a trapped lion he'd saved as a cub 7 years earlier, he discovered something profound. Healing doesn't come from what we receive, but from what we give. Viktor Petrov learned the same truth. Grief had turned him into the very monster his son died fighting against until the day he chose redemption over revenge. Together, these two broken men found family in the most unexpected place, proving that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. Their wildlife foundation now employs dozens of former criminals as protectors, saves hundreds of animals annually, and shows the world that transformation is possible at any age. Jake kept his promise to Sarah. He found something beautiful to save, and in return it saved him. Love doesn't end with death. It multiplies through the lives we choose to protect and nurture. What dream did you think was too late that might still be calling to you? Have you ever experienced an unexpected connection that changed your perspective on family or purpose?